is a great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Proclaiming Justice to the Nation founder, Dr. Laurie Cardoza-Moore. Dr. Cardoza-Moore is a respected go-to voice on the front lines of battle for the ideological, social, moral, and religious minds of this generation. From her role as Special Envoy to the United Nations for Human Rights and Anti-Semitism on behalf of millions of Christians, to her leadership in state houses throughout the Proclaiming Justice to the Nation Anti-Semitism Awareness Resolution, Laurie is a tireless advocate. As host of the weekly TV series Focus on Israel, which in early 2018 joined the Daystar Television Network global broadcasting family, Laurie's message is faithful to the PJTN's core mandate of educating Christians on their biblical responsibility to support Israel and the Jews. She is seeing ignorance give way to positive change of hearts and minds. A homeschooling mother of 5, Laurie Cardoza-Moore original wake-up call was discovering the anti-Semitism, anti-Christian, and anti-American content of her children's textbooks. The revelation of early seeds of indoctrination of American children began her quest to bring awareness and change throughout every avenue she could reach: legislative, media, advocacy, and ultimately the development of PJTN's programs and documentaries that are shared and educate on a mass level. PJTN programming in support of Israel today reaches over 2.6 billion potential viewers on a regular basis through a network of close to 24 TV affiliates and satellite broadcasters. Laurie has been awarded and recognized by her peers for leadership, including the President's Council of the National Religious Broadcasters, the Top 100 People Positively Impacting Israel by Allgemeyer, an honorary doctorate degree in theology from Latin University of Theology, the Friend of Israel Award by the Center for Jewish Awareness, the Goodwill Ambassador to Israel Award given by Israel Consul General of the Israeli Foreign Ministry. And guess what? Laurie was born in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and what would you have guessed Laurie's drive in high school was? Well, it was activism. She never grew out of working for the March of Dimes and more in high school. Her web resource address is www.pjtn.org. After Laurie's talk, we will do a 20-minute Q&A. Let's welcome Dr. Laurie Cardoza-Moore.
I've been coming here for years, and as Mike had mentioned, I'm originally from Fort Lauderdale, and I'm a graduate of Broward County High School. So how come I get it, and now in Broward County we look at what's happened to education? And I suggest to you that the last graduating class that graduated patriots, American patriots, was 1980. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later on because I've been doing research about this. But I also want to recognize the fact that there is a couple here tonight who every time I come to speak, if they're in the audience, I always recognize them. Ron and Lisa Wagner, would you please stand up? We'd like to thank you for the tireless work you've done. Ladies and gentlemen, I mean, we look at this room tonight and the house should be packed because the future of the United States of America rests within the classroom in our communities. And unfortunately, many parents are not aware of the threat of losing our constitutional republic because of what is being taught to our children. It is critical that we, again, establish that this country was based on Judeo-Christian principles, and we should not be ashamed of that.
Amen.
And that's what we should require in our children's textbook. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to go through this slide. So yes, as Mike mentioned, I am the president of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations. Our mission is to educate Christians about their biblical responsibility to stand with our Jewish brethren and defend the state of Israel against the rise of anti-Semitism. Who would have thought, ladies and gentlemen, that we would be living in a day, 70 plus years after the Holocaust and the liberation of the concentration camps, that we would see the level of anti-Semitism that we do, not just in Europe, but here in the United States. A 70% increase, almost 70%, according to the ADL last year, in 1 year. But 70% of Americans support the state of Israel against the Palestinians because they understand freedom. So where is the 70%, almost 70% coming from? It's coming from our secondary and our higher ed campuses, ladies and gentlemen. Have you heard about the anti-Semitism that is growing in our elementary, middle, high schools? We've heard about it going on the colleges, on the university campuses. But now it's infiltrating down into the secondary schools. Why? Because of the content in the textbooks, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Here's a quote that should really rock your world, because it did mine. I wouldn't want to create the impression that I wouldn't like the government of the U.S. to be Islamic at some time in the future, but I'm not going to do anything violent to promote that. I'm going to use... Thank you. Ibrahim Hooper, National Director, and this was of CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations. Let me just remind us, we all know CARE, and if you don't know about CARE, there is a book on the table back there. I encourage you to purchase it and read it, become informed. CARE was listed as one of the unindicted co-conspirators in the largest terrorist fundraising operation in the history of the United States of America. And they are now infiltrating our schools. In fact, in San Diego County, the San Diego Unified School District, they have CARE representatives who come in to educate their children on Islam. That again, CARE has ties to the Muslim Brotherhood, should make all of us nervous. But San Diego School District is not the only school district that's using CARE material. How did we get here? Let's go back to the Yom Kippur War, 1973. We all remember that. It was the Israeli government who came to the United States government and said, we need help, we need everything you've got, because we're being attacked. We gave them everything. And it upset, of course, the OPEC nations. 1974, there was an embargo. The OPEC nations wanted access to our schools of higher learning because, as we all remember, we were sitting in lines. This is an old enough crowd. We all remember sitting at the gas station on even days, waiting to get our gas to fill up our tanks because of the OPEC nations. They turned off the oil because of our stand with Israel. But they had an idea. We will turn the stipend back on, we'll start sending the gas back over, but we want access to your education. We're concerned about how American students may view the Arab countries. So, of course, we also saw the Department of Education by President Carter. That was back in the 70s. The Department of Education was established, and the federal government started to dip into local school districts. Before then, it wasn't a problem. 1980, as I said earlier, I believe is the last graduating class that was taught American patriotism the way we all learned it. And that's why you find people like Sean Hannity, who's my age, 56, and older, who remember America, the great America, the America that we were willing to go and sign up. I know we have some military. Could you please raise your hands? We have veterans here. But our generation remembers truth. If you were to go and tell the teachers today in the classrooms and share with them the history that we were taught, they would look at you like you're crazy. Oh, that's old-fashioned. We've progressed. We've made progress. So the problem, Bill and Melinda Gates. How many of you are aware that Bill and Melinda Gates came up with the concept that they introduced at the United Nations back, actually it was the G8 summit for the UN in Moscow in 2006. They introduced the concept of Common Core. It wasn't called Common Core back then. Of course, the United Nations loved the idea. Global education. So they established the Global Education Initiative. And that's how we got Common Core. Do you think Common Core is just affiliated with the United States? No, it's all over the globe. It's all about revisionist history and getting all of our children around the world on the same page. There's no nation that's greater, no nation more responsible. We're all just the same. We're all even. And of course, who is the culprit? Who's pushing the Common Core agenda? Of course, it's Pearson Publishers. And by the way, Pearson Publishers is not a US-based textbook publishing company. It is based in Great Britain. Unfortunately, Great Britain, we've seen what's happened with education in their country, what's happening to their country with the whole immigration crisis. But Pearson, their shareholders are Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Libya, and who am I missing? Qatar?
The Gaddafi family.
Oh, Saudi Arabia, Libya, Turkey, and Qatar. Yeah, Turkey also. I forgot that. So these are the shareholders for Pearson Publishers. Pearson, 60% of their sales come out of the United States of America. So we're going to talk a little bit more about Pearson. Oh, let me slip back. The federal government intervention only accelerates the fundamental falling of our public schools. And I want to just recognize, because we have the head of Florida Citizens Alliance, if we could keep Law, are you there? He is back here. So as we go through the slides, we're going to introduce you to some of the organizations that we are collaborating with across the state of Florida that are engaged in this battle. Keith is one of them. So I encourage you afterwards to meet with Keith. There's a lot of information in here that Keith's organization has provided for us. Here's another point. Florida education spending grew and consumed about 40% of Florida's $88.3 billion annual budget. Yet, 50% of Florida's 2.8 million students cannot read or do math at grade level. The public education system is failing our nation's students and putting the future of our constitutional republic in jeopardy. And here's a famous quote by President Ronald Reagan: "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same." How prophetic was that back then when he spoke those words? Our focal areas are going to be anti-American, anti-West, and anti-Judeo-Christian content, as well as anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, and Holocaust revisionism, pro-Islamic indoctrination, the roadblocks by local officials, the unconstitutionality of U.S. textbooks, a legal perspective, and a proposed recommendation for next steps. Florida statute states, according to Florida Statute 1003.42, quote, "American history shall be viewed as factual, not as constructed, and shall be defined as the creation of a new nation based largely on the universal principles stated in the Declaration of Independence." What a concept. This is Florida law. So what's happening in our schools? We have, how many of you have been following the whole U.S. Supreme Court? You know, we know Trump is getting tonight, as we speak, is going to be picking who the next justice of the U.S. Supreme Court is going to be. And the U.S. Supreme Court judges are supposed to make decisions based on our Constitution, based on our Bill of Rights, based on all of our founding documents and the writings of our founders, so they accurately portray or apply our laws, our federal laws, to every case that they hear. Well, why don't we have that standard for our textbooks, especially as we're teaching history? Why do we not use those standards, those same standards that the U.S. Supreme Court uses in order to teach our children about our country? You can't know where you're going or your destiny unless you study your history and you know who you are. So we're going to focus on the anti-American, anti-West, and anti-Judeo-Christian content. And again, this comes from a gentleman, this is out of content in Tennessee schools by a gentleman by the name of Hal Rounds. False or distorted content in textbooks leads to the following. Number one, students are given an impression that America is not worthy of pride or loyalty. Sound familiar? Students' understanding of America's position in this world is distorted. And 3, American students' perception of our culture and history is minimized. Here's an example. This AP edition is an objectionable social justice handbook in direct contrast to the founding principles of our nation as defined in the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. Therefore, in violation of our founding American principles according to this Florida state statute. Again, notice the textbook. It is an AP edition Pearson textbook, and this textbook is being used in Collier County. But not just Collier County. These textbooks are being used. If you see the different counties listed with these textbooks, it's not just one county that we have listed. These are being used across the state. Here is the anti-American, anti-West, anti-Judeo-Christian McGraw-Hill, also used in Collier County. In this textbook, the author states that treaties on international law are the supreme law of the land. Excuse me?
No way.
I'm sorry. We're the United States of America. We have our own constitution, our own laws to govern ourselves. Here's another. This is a world history, McGraw-Hill, Glencoe, again used in Collier County. Quote, because humans rejected Allah's, and this is on Islam, because humans rejected Allah's earlier messengers, Allah sent his final revelation to Muhammad. This, quote, delegitimizes Christianity and Judaism by turning Jesus and Abraham into Muslims and marginalizing them.
Do you know what grade that's used in?
Pardon?
Do you know what grade that is used in?
These are high school textbooks. Here we go, the anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, and Holocaust revisionism. By the way, do we have teachers here? School board? Thank you. School board? Member teacher?
Former
Superintendent? Former?
History teacher.
Oh, that's good. Boy, you could tell us this was. Okay, so anti-Semitic revisionism. We're seeing the stereotypic images like we saw during the rise of the Nazis, the images, the caricatures of Jews. Pearson's removal of Judaism as a world religion in their textbooks. The anti-Israel revisionism includes the delegitimization of Israel and Israel's refusal to return land. I'm sorry, we are a Judeo-Christian nation, and we've all sat in Sunday schools, and we all know who God gave the land that he promised Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and their descendants. It was the land of Canaan. So we also know within the Bible that God established, he created the earth, and he established all the nations, and he chose Israel for himself, and he planted them where he wanted them. So, number 3, Holocaust revisionism. Now our children are being taught that there was no Holocaust, and if there was no Holocaust, there would be no Israel. Israel shouldn't exist. And of course, Holocaust is one of many genocides. We're minimizing the problem. Here are 3 textbooks. 2 are Pearson, 1 is Holt Reinhardt, so it's not just Pearson that's got a problem, but let me just emphasize, Pearson is in the process of buying up the history textbooks publishing companies across the country. It is my understanding that they now own 80% of all textbook publishers. However, they don't change the name of the publisher to reflect Pearson. Print us all, because they don't want anybody to think that they've got a monopoly on our children's education. God forbid. Pearson textbooks are objectionable in methodology and presentation with regards to anti-Semitic and anti-Israel sentiment and Holocaust revisionism. This was supplied by Truth in Textbooks, another organization that we're working with here in Florida to fight this battle. Here's the cultural landscape. This is the one I know I'm familiar with. Many of you may have heard it back in 2012 when we found a textbook that had anti-Semitic content in the textbook. It was this one. It was an earlier edition. But the quote basically legitimized Palestinians blowing themselves up in a Jerusalem restaurant because they were waging a war against Israeli government policies and army actions. And of course, the school district, to which I live in right now, voted to keep the textbook because they didn't think that we shouldn't get rid of this textbook just based on one issue. Well, the textbook was riddled with all types of historical inaccuracies, biases, and values that do not reflect Williamson County, Tennessee. However, in this edition of the Pearson textbook, The Cultural Landscape, in Chapter 6, It states the role that Judaism played throughout the centuries as the first monotheistic world religion is minimized and ultimately eliminated as the Judeo-Christian foundation of the U.S. For example, this learning outcome excludes Judaism as one of the 4 largest world religions, relegating Judaism to the category of other religions. Ladies and gentlemen, I kid you not, this Judaism isn't even listed in one of the main religions with Islam and Christianity. It's considered other. Again. And here's the whole Reinhardt textbook. This textbook delegitimizes Israel's historic connection to the land of Canaan, the Promised Land, later named Israel. The use of the name Palestine is not historical ignorance, but rather a concerted effort to remove all traces of Jewish ties to the land of Israel. According to the author, on page 47, Abraham, the founder of the Hebrews, migrated his family to Palestine. Now we know our history. Palestine didn't come in until the Roman period. But we're going to move it up. Moses, upon leaving Egypt, led his people back to Palestine without ever setting foot into the Promised Land. Again, Moses led the Israelites through the wilderness after they left Egypt into where? Canaan. They crossed the River Jordan, went over to Canaan, conquered the land. We know the rest is history, except for these textbooks. The example below illustrates classic Islamist Holocaust revisionism and suggests that without the Holocaust there would be no Israel, and therefore the land was taken away from the indigenous people, Palestinian Arabs. On page 476, quote, as the horrors of the Holocaust were revealed, worldwide support of an independent Jewish homeland increased. On May 14, 1948, Jewish leader David Ben-Gurion proclaimed the establishment of the State of Israel. This is problematic in itself. Look at that. It's a Jewish leader, David Ben-Gurion, proclaimed the establishment of the State of Israel. I'm sorry, how about the United Nations vote to partition the land of Israel in 1947, November 29? But we're not going to teach that part of history to our kids. Why confuse them with the facts? On page 559, quote, in 1948, 5 Arab nations invaded the newly independent Israel and were defeated. Pro-Islamic indoctrination, let's look at that. Exposure to singular pro-Islamic worldview is a result of the following. Number 1, the writing, production, and selection of textbooks and instructional materials are primarily influenced by American Islamic groups and leaders. Do we remember CARE? This is CARE, ladies and gentlemen, and the Council on Islamic Education, which has recently changed its name. Number 2, a majority of public school textbooks are purchased from outside of the U.S. Number 3, the perspective being taught is monolithic. These are comments by Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. How many of you are familiar with Dr. Zuhdi Jasser? He is a Muslim who is trying to reform Islam. I know, I hear that all the time. He's going to be at this for a while, trying to do that. But these are his comments. And I just want to let you all know that next month we have pulled together the team of individuals and organizations that you see in this slideshow, this PowerPoint presentation, will be joining me for a meeting that we've established with the Secretary of DeVos and her team, the Secretary of Education. So you're basically going to see tonight what we're presenting to her, to show her how the problem that we have within our schools. Here's another quote that should make all of us upset. I am waging a bloodless revolution promoting world cultures and faith in America's classrooms. This is Shabir Mansouri. He's founder and director of the Institute on Religious and Civic Values, formerly known as the Council on Islamic Education. Shabir Mansouri is an Indian-born Muslim, and he's waging a bloodless revolution in America's schools. And he works for Pearson. He edits textbooks, Pearson textbooks, in 37 states across the United States. More pro-Islamic indoctrination. Shabir Mansouri is the editor of the Multicultural Perspective of Pearson, published textbooks in 37 states, as I mentioned. And here is Pearson. Pearson's mission statement. Look at this, ladies and gentlemen. Remember, they're not a U.S.-based textbook publishing company. What's the matter with the way we think? I think we do pretty good. I think that our country is something, again, for us to be proud of. Our history, our legacy, and our responsibility to all of humanity, along with our Jewish brethren in the state of Israel. Don't you find it interesting that when the Islamists attack, when they communicate who they're going after, it's always the Saturday people and the Sunday people. The pigs and the apes, the great Satan, the little Satan. It's us. It's Jews and Christians in the last days that are being targeted. Why? Because we testify of the one true God. More pro-Islamic indoctrination. Pearson Publishers is a British-based textbook publishing company, as I mentioned. Their shareholders include the governments of Qatar, Libya, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. Pearson owns 80% of the textbook companies in the U.S., and Pearson is the driving force behind Common Core. Here's an interesting quote, too, from Omar Ahmed, co-founder of CARE. Islam isn't in America to be equal to any other faith, but to become dominant. The Quran should be the highest authority in America, and Islam the only accepted religion on earth. That's the co-founder of CARE. This is what he's saying. I'm just telling you. The roadblocks by local school officials. This is an obstacle to addressing the problem in our schools, in our textbooks. Local school superintendents and school boards block tax-paying citizens' attempts, like Lisa, like Ron, to expose the K-12 content in textbooks pertaining to flawed and erroneous information about Judaism, Israel, the Arab-Israeli conflict, America, and Christianity, and inaccuracies and biases in information about Islamism, Islamists, and their worldwide influence. An unexpected and growing resistance, the majority of local school officials have been indifferent, dishonest, uncooperative, and totally unresponsive to parents and tax-paying constituents. Keith Law has been working on this with others in other communities across the state, and he can tell you that he has run up against these roadblocks as well. Here's an example outside of the state of Florida. In Newton, Massachusetts, over 400 citizens held a rally in front of the school and administration building a couple months ago demanding objectionable content be removed from their public schools. San Diego, California. Parents in San Diego Unified School District, as I mentioned earlier, filed a lawsuit against the school district demanding that the Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE, a Muslim Brotherhood front group, remove the anti-Islamophobia initiative aimed at favoring Muslim students and their families at the expense of their counterparts of other faiths. Now let's talk about the unconstitutionality of U.S. textbooks, a legal perspective. The Establishment Clause of the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution holds that a practice which touches upon religion must not advance or inhibit religion in its principal or primary effect. In order for a religious activity in a government forum to be in compliance with the Establishment Clause, the activity must meet the following. Number one, it must have a secular purpose. Number two, its primary effect must be neither advance nor inhibit religion. And three, it must not entangle the government excessively with religion. What did Adolf Hitler say? Let me control the textbooks and I will control the state. Again, we're old enough to remember the impact that Hitler had in Germany. And also remember that the Holocaust didn't happen in a vacuum in Germany. It was the professors in the university who were already priming the pumps with the kids in the higher ed universities with this garbage, dehumanizing the Jewish people. So when Hitler came to power, the young generation up and coming agreed with him. And the rest is history. Here are our proposed recommendations for next steps in addressing this issue. First, we have to educate, we have to mobilize and activate, and we have to organize to take back local control of our educational system. Being here tonight As I stated earlier, the fact that you all came and you're sitting here in this room tonight, you were divinely called to be here for such a time as this. Think about the fact that you came into the world and God put your soul into your physical body at this hour. Don't think that it was just happenstance and you just fate, as fate would have it, you ended up here at this time. We have all been called. We're the last generation that remembers an accurate perspective of our history. The Judeo-Christian foundation of the establishment of the United States of America. Many even in our age bracket have forgotten the role that the Jews have played historically in establishing the United States of America. I go back to Haim Solomon. For those of you who don't remember who Haim Solomon was, he was a wealthy Jewish banker. He helped bankroll the American Revolution. He died penniless. He gave everything that he had to establish this country. And as Christians, we can never forget the debt that the Jewish community has played, the role that they have played historically in helping us to establish this nation. Not only have they given us this incredible nation, but they have also given us the Torah. They've kept the Word together for us, for those of us who are Christians. Albert Einstein said, "The world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who stand by and do nothing." That's our generation, ladies and gentlemen. This is our task. This is our responsibility. And I'm going to open to some Q&A, but I want to emphasize how important it is that we take up, that our generation, the baby boomers, and I'm right at the tail end, have to take this battle on. The future of our constitutional republic in the United States of America depend on it. We know the truth. And I talk to people all over this country in communities just like this one, where citizens show up just like all of you, and they want to know, they know the threat that we're facing, but they want to know how do we get involved. And I'm going to share with you what we did in Williamson County. When we found the content in the textbooks, in that one textbook, we started digging through many textbooks in our schools, both middle school and high school. And we were finding not just the anti-Semitic, anti-Israel content, but anti-American, anti-Judeo-Christian, pro-Islamic content. And we decided as a community we were going to join forces, we were going to collectively work together to take back local control of our schools. We didn't get here overnight, ladies and gentlemen, and the battle is not going to be won overnight, but it starts with us right here and right now. I see familiar faces in this room who have been to hear me speak about this issue in past years. And I'm so grateful that you're still here, you're still in the battle, you're still doing what you can do to change the direction, the trajectory of where our nation is headed. But we have to do more. I would like to know, just for a starter, how many counties are represented? I know we have Seminole and Orange County. Is that correct? Do we have citizens from
Brevard.
Brevard?
We have Keith is from where's Keith? He's Collier.
Collier?
Lake.
That's 4. Lake County, 5. Volusia, 6. Did we miss anyone? We have 6 counties represented here. And if this chapter would be willing to collaborate with Keith and I and other organizations across the state, we have a strategy to take back control of our schools. But we have to start from the bottom up. You have to start in the local community. I was reminded early on as I prayed about this and said, Lord, how do we take on this battle? Because the same resistance that you have felt for those of you who have objected to the content, like the Wagners. And I said, Lord, how do we win this battle? What is the strategy? And he reminded me of Nehemiah. And we remember the story about the prophet Nehemiah when God told the prophet, or when God, through the heart of King Cyrus, gave Nehemiah and Ezra favor to go back and rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. He went to assess the damage, and he went and convinced district leaders in front of sections of the wall, as well as people who lived in front of other sections of the wall, and he convinced them all, just build your section. And the Lord said to me, he said, each county is a section of the wall of the city. And if you will mobilize the parents and citizens in 6 counties to just fight their battle, to just rebuild their wall, they will be able, as Nehemiah was, to rebuild the walls of the city in record time. But it starts with you and I. And it starts with us praying and asking God for the wisdom and the strategy to defeat the enemy. We have to wear them out and let them know our children are not guinea pigs. We will not sit back and tolerate what they are feeding our children. We are destroying our constitutional republic. And if the constitutional republic is to be saved, it will be because of people like you and I in this room tonight.
Let's give her a round of applause.
Say something out loud. Say, it's my fault. Out loud. Say it. It's my fault. Say it again.
It's my fault.
The reason all this stuff is going on in school, it's your fault. We don't go to school board meetings enough. It is our fault. My mother taught me that. You see something wrong, don't blame it on somebody else. Blame it on yourself. So blame it on yourself. The reason you see all this, it's your fault. You're not speaking up. Because I go to school board meetings, and there's very few people there really trying to get change. And talking to school boards like talking to a brick wall. It is really difficult. And they are tied into the school boards with the textbook publishers and so forth. It's very difficult to get a textbook changed in Florida.
Doug Lewis. I want to start off tonight to say that it's my hope that we can unite and come together as a community around the objective of providing the very best and age-appropriate educational rigor that will bless and benefit all of our children. So I hope that's an objective that I think we can all unite on. It's an issue that doesn't lend itself to sides. It's an issue that can unite the community and the board, but it will not happen unless we have an open, honest discussion. Specifically, I'm here tonight to talk about certain obscene and pornographic content in our libraries. Let me start by asking, can we agree as a board in a community that the opportunity cost of fostering filth in our schools is rigorous educational materials? Can we unite on that principle? I'm not going to speak in platitudes tonight. Let me start by saying that if at any point you determine that what I am going to share is inappropriate for the decorum of this adult meeting, I will respectfully remind you that it's also inappropriate for my sons and my daughter and for our public school children. It's an issue of decency. Can we all stipulate to the fact that the books in school media and our school media centers are books that members of the district chose to purchase at taxpayer expense and to provide to our children? These are choices. Second, remember also that when it was publicly brought to the attention of the district, the superintendent's spokesperson said the following about disclosed pornographic obscene books in our media centers. On June 5th of 2015, the superintendent's spokesperson said the following, quote, "What is offensive to you may not be offensive to me." And in a platitude sense, I don't disagree with that concept. But I'm not here today to talk about platitudes. We're talking about specific books that were disclosed to the district. We are now many days beyond the district's notice of the problem. We are also well beyond the December 2014 board meeting where specific concerns were raised by a parent about obscene books that can still be found in our school libraries 6 months later. A member of the Supreme Court said about pornography, it's difficult to define, but I know it when I see it. To this end, any parents watching at home, please remove your young children from watching this on television. I'm going to read to you a portion of a book that's in the library, with your permission.
You don't have my permission. No. I'm sorry.
Mr. Fishbane, can you give some direction here?
All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will maintain decorum and civility here. Mr. Fishbane.
Right. Our policy and the limits of First Amendment indicate that if it's going to be obscene, we have it there, that's not appropriate. If Mr. Lewis would care, in his own words, just to summarize some of that, that's acceptable. But reading obscene material knowingly is in violation of what our 0165 is about.
Again, we will maintain decorum in this room and civility. Sir, you have your answer.
Mr.
Please
Fishbane,
move
is it your
forward.
determination that
Sir,
material is obscene?
I'm not going to get into a legal discussion. Please determine.
Okay, let me read the material then, and you can make the determination. Please, with all due respect, that's my formal objection in the record.
I hear you, but how much time have this taken up? Because I want to ensure that he gets his appropriate time. If we've
Certainly.
interrupted him. So, if Mr. Duquette, do you know?
There's currently 9 seconds.
Okay, so whatever additional time is accorded to you by that interruption.
I thank you for that. My question to you, Mr. Fishbane, is the material I'm going to read, is it obscene, yes or no, under your rules?
Please move forward, sir.
That was my question.
Mr. Lewis, I have no idea what you're going to say. So if
I'm going to read from page 80. I'm going to read from page 80 of a book called Dreaming in Cuban.
Okay, then if that, you can read from that text, if that's a text.
If at any point it's obscene, please stop me.
Certainly.
Okay, thank you. Hugo and Felicia stripped in their room, dissolving easily into one another, and made love against the whitewashed walls. Hugo bit Felicia's breast and left purplish bands of bruises on her upper thighs. He knelt before her in the tub and massaged the black Spanish soap between her legs. He entered into her repeatedly from behind. Felicia learned what pleased him. She tried.
I have to ask you to stop, sir.
Well, let's just understand this, that you're reading literature. I understand that. And there's a place for that. But if your purpose is to say, I'm going to bring before you something obscene, then you are injecting something different.
My purpose is to ask you, is it obscene?
Are you going to, let me finish my comment?
Sure,
that would be great. So if you're telling us that this is a literary text that is used in our schools and you want to read the page from it, then I don't think, Madam Chair, that we ought to interfere. Let him read that section, and we can move on.
The time is up.
I have, I have interrupted Mr. Lewis in engaging this conversation, and we have made a commitment to honor time.
Okay.
And regardless of differences or whatever, I want that to be honored, because that's what we stand for. So I would ask that Mr. Lewis be given an additional 30 seconds so that he does not have anything that has been taken away from him.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr.
Fishbane.
Fishbane.
Please move forward, sir.
He entered her repeatedly from behind. Felicia learned what pleased him. She tied his arms above his head with her underclothing and slapped him sharply when he asked, "You are my bitch." I won't use that word. Hugo said, groaning. In the morning he left, he promised her a return this summer. The process is broken, and I ask that this district take action to prevent these types of non-rigorous materials, and that's the key term. This is not rigor. I don't send my daughter and my son to school to read this. Can we all accept and agree that the rights of parents are limited or even eliminated when inappropriate books are put into the media centers where parents have no view of what's going on? It is disingenuous to use book banning allegations to promote obscene, pornographic, and non-rigorous materials in our schools. In a nutshell, for me, this creates an issue of judgment and trust, and I ask that that trust and judgment be restored. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker.
2 weeks ago, the Collier County Public School Administration issued an apology for posting a summer reading recommendation list that contained basically about 60 soft to hardcore porn books from the Goodreads.com site for middle schoolers. 60. They claimed the site had changed since it was vetted a month before, but I wasn't convinced it was a mistake because I have seen the required reading lists for high school, and I'm not talking about Mark Twain or To Kill a Mockingbird. Just last year, the required reading for Honors English 3 was Clockwork Orange. Did you know Clockwork Orange begins with a 15-year-old high school boy on drugs enticing two 10-year-old girls into an orgy and then beats them up? So I decided to check the media centers in our schools and see what's available there. I found a book called The Bluest Eye, which is about incest between a father and a daughter. This became the subject of a news story last week by Sophie Nielsen Colding of NBC2, and she read this portion to Mr. Trichetta of CCPS. Quote, "He must rest his weight on his elbows when they make love to avoid hurting her breasts." And Mr. Trichetta's answer to that was, "What is offensive to you may not be offensive to me." Really, Mr. Trichetta, you're not offended by a father raping his young daughter? Okay. Well, how about the book Beloved, where the black members of a chain gang are forced by the white guards to perform a sexual act on the guards, which is supposed to suffice as their breakfast. Also, acts of bestiality are mentioned 4 times in that book, and you can get that book at all our high schools and even Corkscrew Middle School. Now, I'm not going to waste time going through a huge list of inappropriate R-rated books available to minor children of this county. They're there, and there are plenty of them. But it brings to mind a parent's worst fear, that while I'm doing everything in my power to raise good kids in a loving and wholesome environment, that unbeknownst to me, there may be a guy in a black car on a street corner beckoning my child to come here. I have something to show you, enticing my child with books and pictures. And I have no idea my child is being molested. I fear that guy in the black car may be those responsible in this district for putting those books on the shelves for children, putting our child in harm's way unbeknownst to us. Did you know that when the most notorious rapist serial killer, Ted Bundy, was interviewed in prison and asked why he did what he did, he answered, "It all started with porn." A school should be a safe place for children. And we've learned this week the Collier County School District may not be trustworthy. In fact, Mr. Trichetta, peddling porn to minors is against obscenity laws in Florida. When parents take great effort to protect their kids and the district minimizes or ignores it, then we feel our kids' minds and souls are not safe in Collier County Public Schools. Now, here's a thought. We rate movies and video games to protect children from age-inappropriate themes. Why not books? Now, these themes may be okay to atheists, spinsters, young singles, and those with alternative lifestyles, but it's not to parents. It's not okay with us. Don't forget, these are our children. It's too bad we feel like we have to protect them from you. By the way, the Pope warns parents, stop relying on experts to educate your children. It's time that mothers and fathers return from their exile. They've exiled themselves from the education of their children. Don't delegate it to so-called experts.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Ivana Zecki, Steve Bracci, and John Thomas.
If you'll come forward, gentlemen.
Hello, Ivana Zecki, mother of 3 school-age kids in Collier County. Last spring, 6 weeks prior to the end of the school year, I was forced to pull my daughter out of Pine Ridge Middle School. There were multiple issues throughout the school year that contributed to this, but the final straw was my 13-year-old being forced to watch movies in class that depicted the rape of slaves, their being impregnated with mulatto babies, and hearing about religious groups where postmenopausal women will teach young boys how to have sex. This is in U.S. history class. We had to go to great time, expense, and trouble to get her set up homeschooling while we waited to hear what was going to be done about this. We are still waiting, and while we've been waiting, we continue to hear about more inappropriate content in the classrooms and books on the bookshelves in our middle school and high schools, some of which I've already talked to the Pine Ridge librarian about prior to removing my daughter. Some that I've just recently learned about are The Bluest Eye, Beloved, Dreaming in Cuban, which you heard excerpts of. And the reason we're just hearing a lot about these 3 books is not because it's just 3 books, it's just because these are very well-known books. There are thousands of books available to our children that parents do not have time to go through individually and read, in addition to raising children and working. We send our children to school to learn how to do math, science, reading, writing. Let's focus on getting that right. There is not a shortage of good literature that we have to include these types of books in our children's libraries. And if there are some children who thirst for sexual content, I don't think it's our school's responsibility to quench that thirst. This is becoming a systemic problem and undermining the ability of parents to trust this district with our children. Thank you.
Or don't know much about history, brought to you tonight by the Internet. If it's on the Internet, it's got to be true. That's where the author of this 4th grade Virginia history book says she got some of her facts. And in her book, which is read in classrooms across the Commonwealth, you can find facts like these. Now, we've added commentary from Homer Simpson, who, just like the author, is not a historian, just in case you were wondering. Fact: the United States entered World War I in 1916. Actually, it was 1917. Fact: there were 12 Confederate states. Nope, 11. Fact: in 1800, New Orleans was a U.S. port. Don't! All right, well, Homer's right. There are dozens of errors in the book, but a mother and a historian at William and Mary noticed perhaps the worst one of all in the book.
It was particularly jarring when I got to this one passage that was so at odds with what historians have been saying about who participated in the Civil War.
The book says thousands of Southern blacks, which the facts do not support, including 2 black battalions under the command of General Stonewall Jackson. Just 2 things wrong there. One, it wasn't even until 1865 that African Americans could serve in the Confederate Army, and Stonewall Jackson died in 1863.
It is the equivalent of Holocaust denial being taught in the public schools. But worse, it's also the equivalent of saying that the Jews helped the Holocaust.
Again, the author's not a historian, and she says she found the information on, wait for it, yes, that's right, the Internet. Her publisher, though, defending her, saying, quote, "I don't think the author could necessarily be accused of being stupid and doing Internet-only research." All right, maybe we're all being a bit too harsh here. After all, it's hard enough for some people to even sit through history, let alone write it.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? The Great Depression, passed the, anyone? The tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which, anyone, raised or lowered? Raised tariffs.
See, no wonder Ferris Bueller took the day off. And if he were a Virginia 4th grader, he might have actually learned a whole lot more about history by ditching class. And why would anyone buy such a book in the first place? Well, one school official told CNN they were about $17 cheaper than the alternative, saving Virginia schools money, but landing them on the ridiculous.
Hi, my name is Deirdre Clemens, and I am from Collier County in Florida. I am the mother of 10 children, and the 5 oldest ones who've completed their education have 9 degrees between them. We've attended public schools, we've attended private schools, and especially when we were overseas, we homeschooled a bit. And so I'm a successful educator, and I have picked curriculum. Recently, Pope Francis was quoted as saying, "Educational manipulation of children has its roots in totalitarianism. Schools are becoming re-education camps." I believe our children are being put in harm's way, especially concerning U.S. history, where instead of objective facts, including names, dates, and events, our books are filled with political bias and opinion, with the effect of subverting our children's minds against this republic and our free market system. It is directly opposed to the Florida State Statutes Education Code 1003.42, which states, and I quote, "We must use books and materials that meet the highest standards for professionalism and historic accuracy. American history shall be viewed as factual, not constructed, with arguments in support of our republic's form of government, nurturing and protecting democratic values and institutions, teaching the importance of free enterprise to our economy, and stressing patriotism, responsibility, citizenship, respect, and self-control." I've found a systemic problem in history, and let me show you some examples. Last year at Pelican Marsh in Naples, Florida, the third grade had an assignment named History of Thanksgiving. And in this, in essence, it says Thanksgiving is a hurtful holiday because it stands for the beginning of the end of the Indians. In 8th grade at Pine Ridge Middle School, they had an assignment called What is an American? And the highlighted part states that any person who wants to be an American already is, even though they've never set foot in this country and live somewhere else. Now, if your child is in a U.S. government class in Naples, their book will be Principles and Practice, and it's in the middle. There's 2 pages comparing capitalism and socialism. It tells that Marx argued the working class was treated unfairly by the capitalist system, and that socialism best protects the workers' rights. It says socialist nations today are generally democratic, and they use the UK as an example, where healthcare is paid for by the government, and the workers actually have more rights than workers in America. The last paragraph states that the inequalities of capitalism harm the greater good, and that it's fair to provide everyone with their basic needs. I wonder what teenagers think of that when they read that, capitalism versus socialism. Now, if your child is signed up for an AP history course, in this county, there are no prerequisites for this course. This is the only thing you'll be getting in high school. And these are the kids on the fast track to college, the next movers and shakers, the next generation. And this course will tell you that this framework is not a curriculum. It does not consist of a list of historical content like names, events, and dates. Instead, the framework consists of 4 major components, the first of which, historical thinking skills. Now, let me give you a little example of how that plays out. It gives you an example of a long essay question on their website. And this essay question is, some historians have argued that the American Revolution was not revolutionary in nature. A good response to this question could be, and they give an example, could be, no, it was not revolutionary in nature because George Washington, Jefferson, and Adams were just as rich before the war as after the war, that it was basically a war against the elites of England with the elites of America, and nothing changed for Indians, women, and blacks. So it wasn't revolutionary at all. Now, if your child is in a regular U.S. history class, either regular or honors, they'll be using, in Naples, they'll be using the Americans, Reconstruction to the 21st century. And the reason it's called the Americans is because every chapter quotes an American living at that time that talks about the time period, which sounds like a good idea till you read the whole book, which I did read all 900 pages. It starts out with, you live in the 15th century, now you sense your world is about to change. How will the arrival of this strange people affect your way of life? What can happen when one culture imposes its values on another? I'm not sure U.S. history should start out with a victim of America. And what you'll find out is this whole book is victims complaining about America. Most chapters start with a quote from a quote-unquote victim of American history, and that's why they call this the Americans. They are speaking themselves. I'm not going to show you too many. I've marked this whole book up, but I want to show you the ones that really stand out. Here's one that says, Johnson was only one of 19 socialist mayors who worked to institute progressive reforms in American cities. Here they are marrying the two terms progressive and socialist. These mayors focused on dismissing corrupt and greedy private owners of utilities, converting the utilities to publicly owned enterprises, and they talk about these other progressive reforms. And when you get to the end of this chapter, they restate to you progressivism, which is also socialism, is the champion of the 40-hour work week, the end of child labor, voting rights for women and blacks, despite Republican, conservative, capitalist business owners who are the foils of history throughout this book. Every time something was done to help people, it was always the progressive socialists against the backlash of Republican, conservative, capitalist business owners who are the foils of history. Here's another chapter on imperialism in America. I was taught that we weren't an imperialist nation. UK, other nations have gone around the world and well, let's see what the definition is. Imperialism is the policy in which stronger nations extend their economic, political, and military control over weaker territories. It sounds kind of like a bully to me. And the reason we did that is because, right here it states, because our desire for military strength, our thirst for new markets, and our belief in our cultural superiority. This isn't the history I learned when I was in school. Here's a chapter on the atom bomb, point and counterpoint. It almost sounds like counterpoint, counterpoint. Because over here in the personal voice, you have a man from Japan talking about faces melting and how horrible it was, which is true. And over here, they say one of the reasons we dropped it was to give us a powerful advantage over the Soviets. And on the counterpoint, it says that the Supreme Allied Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, said that dropping the bomb was completely unnecessary and the Japanese were ready to surrender. I'm not sure that's correct. I don't think you can drop a bomb without the Allied commander giving, the Supreme Commander giving the command. Okay, and another concerning chapter is this one that portrays Gorbachev as taking the initiative. He was the prime mover in bringing down the East Berlin Wall. There's no mention of the key role that Reagan had, and no mention of Pope John Paul II and the Solidarity movement in Poland, or Thatcher. It is all, the credit is all given to Gorbachev. This book is called The Americans because every few pages they quote an American living at that time, and more often than not, it's a disgruntled victim of America, the American system. My opinion is it's a myopic and unbalanced presentation through the lens of the victims of our culture, Indians, Africans, African Americans, women, Latinos, and immigrants. It has an anti-American bent that gives the illusion that this country is all about the struggle against bigotry, unbridled capitalism, sexism, racism, rather than the miracle of the creation for the first time in history of a constitutional republic created by the people, for the purposes of protecting God-given rights and freedom. And it is that Constitution that brought the end of slavery and women's right to vote and all the freedoms we enjoy today. This history and these materials appeal to pro-socialist views. Progressivism, which they do admit is socialism in the book, is given credit for everything good that has happened in this country. And conversely, conservatives, business owners, Republicans, capitalists, and white men are the foils of history, and there's a repeated theme all through that book. Rather than create good citizens, though, I think this promotes malcontents who view the U.S. and our free market economy, or what's left of it, as oppressive and unjust. In fact, the AP U.S. history material comes with a warning that states that some may think it too far left. It is lacking in historical fact, but full of opinion and spin, historical thinking skills. However, I contend that putting forth these skewed perceptions is tantamount to stealing our children's birthright to freedom. After all, ignorance of history dooms one to repeat it. This U.S. history book is 900 pages of all kinds of unnecessary stuff. It's like a People magazine with plenty of opinion pieces, and the AP course is purely an opinion piece. But let's get back to the question, what is the purpose of teaching a class in U.S. history? After all, many of those stories are true. Slavery, racism, and the treatment of Indians, without deleting any of that, the basic knowledge kids need to know of who, what, when, where, and why this country was a miracle and possibly the greatest experiment of human freedom. It truly is a first in human history. But kids won't understand that until you remind them of the total subjection of people to their rulers since time immemorial up to the founding of this nation. But our statutes, at least in Florida, luckily, protect us by requiring that history be factual and that it promote good citizenship and patriotism. I think our Florida statutes seem to say that U.S. history is objective and should be based on fact, focusing on the most important foundational facts of our nation, not a subjective narrative of political opinion. As parents, I think we can refuse a dictatorship of relativism where we can't know the truth or reality for certain. History should be viewed from an objective, factual lens. There are events, dates, and places. And there are important things to know about how we got here and how to preserve this system. And that is what U.S. history should be about, preserving our history. Politics is something else. Thank you.
If every high school principal gave the following speech, America would be a much better place. To the students and faculty of our high school, I am your new principal and honored to be so. There is no greater calling than to teach young people. I would like to apprise you of some important changes coming to our school. First, this school will no longer honor race or ethnicity. I could not care less if you are black, brown, red, yellow, or white. I could not care less if your origins are African, European, Latin American, or Asian, or if your ancestors arrived here on the Mayflower or on slave ships. The only identity this school will recognize is your individual identity, your character, your scholarship, your humanity. And the only national identity this school will recognize is American. This is an American public school, and American public schools were created to make better Americans. If you wish to affirm here an ethnic or racial identity or a national identity other than American, you will have to attend another school. This includes after-school clubs. I will not authorize clubs that divide students based on identities such as race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or whatever else may become in vogue in our society. Those clubs cultivate narcissism, an unhealthy preoccupation with the self, while the purpose of education is to get you to think beyond yourself. The school's clubs will be based on interests and passions, clubs that transport you to the wonders and glories of art, music, astronomy, languages you do not already speak, and more. If the only extracurricular activities you can imagine being interested in are those based on ethnicity, race, or sexual identity, that means that little outside of yourself really interests you. Second, I do not care whether English is your native language. My only interest in terms of language is that you leave this school speaking and writing English as fluently as possible. The English language has united America's citizens for over 200 years, and it will unite us at this school. Furthermore, I would be remiss in my duty to ensure that you will be prepared to successfully compete in the job market if you leave this school without excellent English language skills. We will learn other languages here. It's deplorable that most Americans only speak English. But if you want classes taught in your native language rather than in English, this is not the right school for you. Third, because I regard learning as a sacred endeavor, everything in this school will reflect learning's elevated status. This means, among other things, that you and your teachers will dress accordingly. There will be a dress code at this school, and you will address all teachers by their title, not by their first name. They are your teachers, not your pals. Fourth, no obscene language will be tolerated anywhere on this school's property. By obscene language, I mean the words banned on radio and television, plus epithets such as the B word, even when addressed by one girl to another, or the N word, even when used by one black student to another. It is my intent that by the time you leave this school, you will be among the few your age to distinguish between the elevated and the degraded, the holy and the obscene. Fifth, we will end all self-esteem programs. In this school, self-esteem will be attained in only one way, the only way self-esteem can be attained, by earning it. One immediate consequence is that graduating classes will have one valedictorian, not 8. Sixth and last, I am reorienting the school toward academics and away from politics and propaganda. No more time will be devoted to racism, sexism, Islamophobia, homophobia, global warming, tobacco, or gender identity. No more classes will be devoted to condom wearing and teaching you to regard sexual relations as no more than a health issue. And there will be no more attempts to convince you that you are a victim because you are not white or male or heterosexual or Christian. This school will have failed if any of you graduate without considering him or herself inordinately lucky. Lucky to be alive and lucky to be an American. Now, please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of our country. As many of you do not know the words, your teachers will hand them out to you. I'm Dennis Prager.